Today's guest is someone who works quietly, powerfully, and with deep compassion behind the scenes of maritime life. Silvie Boyd is a port chaplain in Le Havre, France, with a background in social work and faith based community care. She has served in ports across Europe and Africa and is trilingual, which allows her to connect deeply with the diverse crews she supports. In this conversation, she gives us a glimpse into a world many never see, the human side of shipping. What really struck me during our talk was how clearly she laid out the emotional and mental health challenges that seafarers face, from the stress of overlapping inspections to the crushing impact of short port stays that leave no time for rest or even a walk on shore. She reminds us that efficiency often comes at a human cost. We also explored the communication conundrum, how 24/7 connectivity is both a blessing and a burden for crews navigating war, illness, and distance from home. This episode is a reminder that seafarers aren't just moving cargo, they're carrying stories, pressures, fears, and hopes. And people like Silvie are showing up for them, one conversation, one visit, one human moment at a time. Hi, Silvie. Thank you so much for being on this podcast today. I'm so very happy and I'm looking forward to doing this interview with you.
Morning, Tyler from Le Havre. I'm also very happy to be able to participate in your Waves of Change project.
Thank you very much. So let's kick it off. I'm gonna start with the first question. So, Silvie, can you take us back to the beginning? What led you to become a port chaplain, and what does that role truly mean to you?
What led me there is a job ad because I always had the feeling I had a call for going international. I always wanted to use my languages in my social work, and I always wanted to have target groups which are challenging me each day. So I saw that job ad for the position in Douala for the port chaplain of the German seafarers mission. And they searched for somebody who was fluent in French. And since I had also a degree in French, I thought, wow, that's made for me. And I didn't know anything about seafarers in that time. I never dealt with that target group before in my life, even though I lived most of my life in a port city like Hamburg.
Oh, wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, I applied and they picked me. And that was the start of getting a training also in the beginning in different ports in Europe about seafarers and what are the challenges they face and what is our task and what are our services we can offer and how can we support. That's our motto. How can we support their dignity at sea, in the ports, and also sometimes the families at home when the seafarers are stuck somewhere for different reasons.
Yeah. I mean, that's that type of work is very compassionate. And you mentioned that you spoke multiple languages. What languages you actually speak?
Well, at least for our job, of course, it's English,
Yeah.
as you know.
Yeah.
And then I learned French. I think usually I would see myself more fluent in French than in English.
Yeah.
And I learned also Portuguese, but I must admit that in lack of practice, I can understand the context, but I would not say I could counsel someone in Portuguese, but at least I can understand the problem and I can try to figure it out then later, thanks to new technology. And I learned also Wolof, West African language, and Some little phrases because I grew up in Germany. We and in Hamburg you have a big Turkish community, so all of my neighbors were Turkish, so I understand a bit of Turkish. That's it, I would say.
I think for me, like one thing is that I really admire people who speak multiple languages because I grew up all my life just speaking English, and it's only when I moved to France that I decided to well, I had to learn French, and I really really appreciate how difficult that is to just express yourself in a different language. So that is very admirable about you. I find that so amazing. So you've worked in Douala, Cameroon, and now you're in Le Havre. These are really different port communities, and but what have they taught you about seafarers, the seafarers you support?
Well, in fact, the fun part is that seafaring is global, and that is really true, and that's what I encountered here. And especially in the first year in COVID times, I met when the seafarers were stuck on board, and we were the only ones they saw because we were the only ones that were allowed on board.
Wow.
Um, was that I couldn't see under the mask the same faces, but they recognized me immediately, and they were asking me, "Hey, ma'am, haven't you not been in Douala before?" And it was so amazing that you come on a tanker, you don't expect to know anyone, and under the mask, particularly, it's more difficult to have this human contact, this social contact, which we need for our work. And then the chief turns to you and says, "Hey, ma'am, I know you. Do you remember me?" So, in fact, you meet the same people all over the world, and they're facing different challenges. To be honest, in the Gulf of Guinea, we were more facing these piracy cases and abandonment, which I have, of course, not met yet. Fortunately, here in Normandy. But we face the other human factors, of course, like death on board, like sickness, like mobbing on board, like well, every human thing. You can have fights on board, and we are called for accompanying, for example, the concerned persons to the doctors. And the seafarers, I think, in general, they can face all these problems everywhere in the world, and they can also be happy crew all over the planet. It just depends on different factors, but. Um, the challenges they can meet, like no shore leave, no time for shore leave, or just stress because of all the inspections they will have. Or, for example, being low in provision. I met that a lot of times, and even here in Europe, it's shocking. I thought this is typical to Africa, but it's not. You even face big European companies that are not able to manage their provision, their bunkering. It's yeah, it's kind of something which is happening in secret and which they don't tell you immediately, which takes them a while to have confidence in you, and then suddenly they come up with it and they do like it's normal that they have no vegetables or they have no water and they need to go out to get water, even drinking water. So I think now when I look back, I would say no, it's in fact it's the same problems all in all. Just the big two ones which you have in Africa, piracy and abandonment, you don't face them here that obviously around Europe.
Okay. That actually, it's I think what you said is very um, insightful because I think when we think about the jobs of seafarers, we t think about the aspects of the job itself, not the social part or the human impact of the job. So, I feel like you've given us a little insight into something that we really haven't looked at before. And some of the things you mentioned, like I've actually, because I was a seafarer too, and a long, long time ago, and I've been on vessels where provisions were low. I remember that, and we did act like it was normal. So that is kind of interesting that you mentioned that. So, I mean, this all sounds really, really very, interesting. So I want to know what a typical day looks like for you as a port chaplain, and what are some of the challenges or joys that come up with this job?
Typical is no day. That's what I maybe like about this job so much, and that's why I'm for nearly now in the eighth year doing the same job, which was never possible for me beforehand,
Yeah.
um, because I was bored easily in the jobs before.
Hmm.
And that sounds pretty arrogant, I know, but I need the challenge. I need this being having to be flexible, having to go with the flow, and not being able to plan. Yes, I'm trying to plan. So, for example, this morning I made my list of 5 vessels which I want to visit, 5 crews.
Hmm.
Sometimes I'm stuck after the third crew because I spent too much time on board, which I did not expect. I thought, okay, if I do this tanker and this ro-ro, it will take me maybe 1 hour or so. And then I'm already on the second crew and I meet someone who opens up and that can take. And I don't tell them, oh no, I don't have time. I have to run to the next vessel. I never do that because that's what they hear all the time. Sometimes they even ask me, oh ma'am, only if you have time, huh? And I always tell them, that is what I can gift you, my time. Yeah. So normal day is that I do my list, that I can tell you, and that I put myself into the car, into the port, and I will access whatever gangway there is and meet the people. So, and I hopefully do in average at the moment 4 vessels a day, 4 crews. That is, I would say, a normal, typical day for me. And then I have also a lot of messages by WhatsApp. When I woke up this morning, I already had messages from seafarers. So by WhatsApp, by Messenger, the guys contact me, particularly when they're on board, sometimes even when they're already back home, because it takes them time to adjust also back to their normal life, which also nobody considers that they're. Yesterday, for example, in a conversation, they told me, yeah, nobody considers that we are 10 months on board and then when we come back home, everything has changed.
Mm.
So they're like nearly the whole year off, and in a different society, which is very narrow for them, which they have not picked. And then they come back home, and people have evolved there. Things have evolved, events have passed without them, and they come back, and people are now married, or even their wives have given birth and they have been away. So,
Yeah.
of course, they see that by video call, but it's not the same as living it.
Yeah.
So, well, I would say that's a typical day. And then the joys you were asking for are the service I offer is also doing excursions with them. So if there are crews that have a little bit more time, more port stay, then I offer to discover the beautiful surroundings, the city of Le Havre. I offer a guided tour and the way they perceive nature when they have been stuck on board for 7, 8 months
Oh yeah.
and then they come on ground and then they touch a tree or smell the fresh grass that has just been cut. That is something that touches me deeply in my soul too. Their joy of being outside and being just a normal human being. That's really adorable to watch, to observe.
I mean, Sylvie, what you said there is very revealing, and the work that you do is so compassionate. I'm lost for words almost. But so much of your work seems rooted in transition, life changes, cultural bridges, these moments of crisis. how do you emotionally navigate that space, holding others while also staying grounded yourself?
Thank you for that question. I think that is our personal biggest challenge. And I think, as you might know, most of the people who do this job worldwide are persons that are persons of faith. We have our belief, like, for example, we are from, like my organization, we are from the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Germany. So we are all trained as deacons of our church. So um, we're convinced of having a faith inside of us that strengthens us and that gives us the force to endure also and to be able to do what we do, I think. For me, that helps a lot. I have, for example, my parish here where I go and where I do music with them. We do gospels together, and we kind of carry each other through Jesus and through our belief in God. And I think it's also what we share with the seafarers on board. So it's a kind of giving and taking in that faith that grounds us and that makes us stronger and makes us also go ahead and persevere with all the hard stories we hear and we also live with the seafarers.
No. Um, that's very powerful. I mean, if I have to think about it, I don't know what would be that grounding thing for me because your job is so intense with the emotion with that emotional factor. And that you have something, your religion and your belief and your faith, I think it's very powerful. Are there any seafarer stories that have really stayed with you, ones that have shifted your own perspective, maybe, you know?
There, to be honest, there nearly all. There are no stories that go into the background. The really stories that touch, they stay forever. Um, Not only with me, also with the guys, because some guys went through stuff and they keep in touch. They write me still for the big feasts, for Christmas or Easter and or sometimes out of the blue and ask me, "Hey, ma'am, how are you? Long time." So I think stories remain, things you went through remain embedded in us.
Mhm.
One really heavy one was an Indian chief officer of a tanker who disappeared after having had an appointment at the doctor's here in Le Havre. And we were searching for him with the police, even, I mean, for 4 nights. It was in February, really cold here in Normandy. I could
No.
never sleep outside. And everybody, especially the police here, was convinced that he wanted to flee. He wanted to live in Europe, and. And well, I offered our mission address as the address where he could come to without being judged, without having anything to fear. That's what ITF did here. And finally, we ended really up finding him. I had a counseling time with him in the hotel where he was put by the agent. And we agreed to bring him to psychiatry because the ITF inspector here, she was insisting in the fact that if he, well, disembarked like this, yeah, illegally, he would lose all his possibilities of ever returning into his position like before.
Mhm.
So he needs something to certify that he is sick and that he can get that he can continue getting payment from the company, and that also that he gets treated, of course, in his country. So I had contact with his whole family, particularly with his brother, who was able to speak fluently English.
Mhm.
His wife Indian, but she didn't speak any English, so my Hindi is not existing besides some little words. So I understood from her being on WhatsApp that she's worried, but she could not communicate with me, and I couldn't with her. But with his brother, I did, and I faced this difficulty of a provider, somebody who is on board, and everybody is relying on the money that is coming in. So he was torn apart in between this duty, his inner um, obligation of making money for his family, and then being in a situation which he couldn't stand on board anymore. There was too much stress. I think there was also mobbing and kind of unfair treatment from his hierarchy. He never went there. He never admitted it in the time I've spent with him together. But the stories he told, and from what you could read in between the lines, I'm pretty convinced that that was the issue, that made him also trap in the stairs to hurt his ankle so that he could go to the doctors. And then he decided, once he was on ground, that he could never return. That if he cannot stand the situation anymore, and nothing is going to change if he returns on board. So he prefers regaining his peace on land. So he bought himself a sleeping bag at Aldi's and put himself in front of a school where he slept at nights for 4 nights in February in winter time,
Mm.
just because he was so desperate of the situation and he didn't know what else to do. That there was his solution. And now he's still back on board, but not internationally. He's doing offshore operations around India. So he has found something which is, I think, a good compromise for what he can stand and what is good for him and doable.
Wow, that's such a complex story and issue, and you were there for every point, and you actually was very compassionate. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if you were there to step in and help in the way that you did. And I think that that type of that help to seafarers is so important. Um, so have you ever felt resistance in your role because you're a woman in a maritime related field, or have you found it empowering?
Ever felt? Yes, of course. Yeah, it's not paradise, huh?
Yeah.
Everywhere where you are the only woman, you are facing challenges. You will always face moments where you see that the other has an issue with you. Um, but um, what I think is our gender is so worthy. We have such a big impact. I've lived on in different continents, and I've seen who is powerful and who is in fact leading. And I'm convinced that in fact, even though on all the big etiquettes, it's the white old guys that are leading this planet, I'm convinced that behind all of these, there is a strong woman. And maybe we're in the background, but I think we have so many important gifts and talents to share. And also in what I do, I see it every day. What we bring is different than what a man usually is able and is allowing himself to bring. Maybe some men could do the same thing, but I'm convinced that the female attributes, and I'm not ashamed of saying that, but I think I'm very emotional
Mm-hmm.
and I am very empathetic. Um, and I'm a mother.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm also a woman in the field of I lived relationships, so I can relate to a lot of these realities which seafarers face too. They have long distance relationships. So I had that. The father of my kids, he's from the US. When we hooked up,
Mm-hmm.
he was very far away for a long, long time, and it was very difficult. So I can relate to a lot of their issues they face every day, and they feel that. They feel that they can rely on me, and they can tell me their secrets is a bit too much said, but they feel like I'm a normal human being that has lived also a normal human life. I'm not like some figure, um, ecclesiac figure, which is somewhere in church and you cannot have day-to-day conversation with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm the social worker. I'm the normal human factor that comes and brings um, sometimes maybe often now because I'm getting older, of course, in the job, the mother figure for them because they're very young. My youngest seafarer, my youngest trainee that is on board actually on a feeder, he's 18 from
Mm.
Ukraine. So he's in the same age like my sons. My sons are turning 18 in the end of August. So I think um, in general, we're well seen on board as women because they don't see women. Well, this 1.2% of women, or 1.5, I don't even believe it, the 2% as they say globally, in seafarers on board. Um, and that they're not used to having women around, and they enjoy having women around every time usually. Then they're able to have different topics. With me, they will not talk about the problems they have in the engine room because I tell them immediately, if I don't understand a word of what you're saying, we can talk about other stuff. And it's not, they show us the engine room and I always tell them I'm very interested, but don't ask me any question. Don't expect me to know anything afterwards. Because yeah, I might be good in languages and my social skills are good, but I'm really bad in techniques. I don't understand shit. So, um, I think the female factor is more of positive and empowering point for what I do, for what my job is. I don't need to come on board to sell stupid SIM cards. I come on board and bring myself and bring my smile and my welcoming way of doing. And usually I stay even though they're stressed. Yeah, they tell me at first, oh, we have no time. Yesterday, for example, came into a ship's office, and then the chief officer was on the computer. The first 7 minutes, I was just talking to a third officer, and I was hurrying up with all the information because the third I've never met before. So, and I felt like, okay, inspection is on board, the captain is on his way here, so they might be too stressed. And then finally, I don't know how, but the chief turned and he stood up from his computer and he exchanged with us because I was with one of my other female volunteers. And he talked to us and he smiled and he changed the topic and yeah. So even if he looked very busy and he said it, and I said, yeah, I see, I noticed that you're very busy, no problem. Maybe we can see next round. Then he turned and implicated into the conversation. And I think that's what it is. It's like showing them, I understand your situation and I respect that. And if it's better to come next round or tell me if it's better to come later, then we'll do that. So this flexibility and this respect you show, I always get that back anyway. And I think it's the female factor that eases up a lot of things.
Yeah. You mentioned twice, a couple times, the stress of the inspections that they have, right? I was just curious to know if if you could expand a little bit about that, like a lot of seafarers have inspections that are quite intense.
Yes, I think mm, it's underestimated what they need to do, especially, I have the feeling, especially the position of the chief officers. Um, One told me a couple of months ago, if I had known what and how this job would be evolving, then I would have stayed second. Would have been a better role because they tell me now, yeah, we have our email and communication is, but everybody expects us to answer immediately. So we are always on the computer. We always have to react. We always have to fill in some templates. We always have to check something, and it's nonstop. And in each port, they have different inspections
Mhm.
and surveyor and flex state control. And there's so many different controls in Europe. And I have the feeling, I thought, if you do that in one port, why, with all the technology we have,
Yeah,
why do they have to do it in each port?
yeah.
The vessel is the same. The crew is the same. What is changing from when I go from Antwerp to Rotterdam and then afterwards to Le Havre? What has changed in these couple of miles? Um, I think the dangerous part is in the whole maritime industry is the money
Mhm.
everybody is making with it. And they all neglect the human factor. How much they stress people with always requesting the same things over and over again. And if there's a little point missing, then it's a big issue already. So I can understand that it's totally stressful. I myself don't like administration. I have to do it in my job too. And
Mhm.
I can totally relate to that, being stressed by people coming on board. Often they ask me that when they see me and maybe my posture, they ask me, ma'am, what do you want? What do you need? And then I look at them and say, sorry, sir, I don't need anything. I'm bringing something on board. And I
Ah,
don't request any papers. I just give you some information which are related to your well being. And then they look at me like, what? Well, what do you mean? It's like they're so in that role of they have to submit papers, they have to give something to the person that comes on board, signatures, stamps, whatever. That that is the first question you can encounter.
yeah. I mean, that's it's really stressful. And the thing about it is that I don't think we think enough about the mental capacity, the impact on the mental health for seafarers in that way. And so that's very insightful stuff. Um, what would you say is the biggest challenge? Oh, no, sorry, the biggest change you have seen in the welfare of seafarers over the last 10 years, and what still needs to change?
Biggest change is communication with the
Hmm.
family. I was just writing an article in our journal on unlimited Wi-Fi on board? Question mark. Is that um, a blessing or is it more disturbing the dynamics on board?
Ah,
And I interviewed seafarers for that because I wanted to have real voices from on board. And I think it is very important that, particularly in community based um, societies, cultures, that people stay in touch and are able to communicate to their families. But I also see the difficulty sometimes, particularly in cases I had where the wife, for example, is in cancer state 4, and the guy has to remain on board to earn the money to pay for the treatment she's
oh,
going through. So
wow.
he is torn apart in between. Uh, being home but having no money, or being far away from her and not be able to hold her hand and to support her with his presence, but at least being able to send the money for the treatment. So there is a very important part in they should be able to communicate. But when you have people that have these private situations, or like nowadays, actually the conflicts, the big ones, the civil war in Myanmar,
Hmm.
yeah, the guys are on board with Ukrainians that are also in a war.
Hmm.
And if these guys have too much contact or too little contact, it's very dangerous for their work on board, to be honest, I think. But that is a big change. How to handle this communication part for the well-being of the people, because sometimes too much information has a big impact and can have a very negative impact on um, the quality you do your job with. Because if you're always stressed, or if you're always wondering because you cannot reach your loved ones because they're hidden in a cave because they're bomb attacks. Um,
Oh, yeah.
it has an impact on how you perform your job, your role, and you're not going to be exchanged. You're not going to be disembarking because the whole crew is, or half of the crew is from Ukraine, so they cannot disembark you because they don't find any. Actually, they don't find enough seafarers to. They don't find relievers. They have a real issue in getting, yeah, changing the stuff on board. I see that in a lot of companies right now for the last 1.5 years. I think there's a big change in what do people know about the job. So I think there's might be less new generation that is willing to do the job
Mhm.
in Europe at least.
Yeah.
And the point of communicating, we are all used to communicating nonstop, but is it really better for us?
Yeah.
Also, not only the people on board, but also for us on land. Huh? If I see that, we
Yeah.
have all these social media, but is it really advancing, progressing us personally as humans, or is it sometimes even putting more pressure on us? That
Yeah.
is the big change also in maritime, I would say. And of course, the speed of the cargo operations. If you see everybody's getting more automized. For example, I've been to Rotterdam one day with my colleague and visiting crews at nights because they would just stay 8 hours. It's shocking, I think. If the
Yeah.
guys have no time for going out because there's so many cranes working, like 4 to 6 cranes on these big container vessels, and then they're just popping out again and they don't even stay in the ports anymore. Yeah, I sometimes wonder how long are we still going to be existing, the port chaplains, because we use the time there on at port stay. So I might not be seeing it until I retire.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point because, we're focused on efficiency within the ports and with vessels and turning over the vessels quickly in the port to save on money and time because time in a port is one of the biggest factors in profit and efficiency. But we never ever think about how it impacts the seafarers that now they've been this time, this break has been taken away from them. And how important that is. I think it's actually very, very important because we don't really understand the mental stress or the social aspects of this field as you're explaining it now. Um, but I want to like,
Carla,
yes.
excuse me, I have one more point for that. What is a change? I have also noticed a change with regard to your main topic, to seafarers.
Ah,
I've seen, particularly in the last years, more and more young women on board.
mm,
So, and particularly here in Europe, I could notice that there are more women trying to go to do this job, and they try to perceive themselves. I interview a lot on board because I'm also writing on seafarers, and they perceive themselves as able and even as better as men. That's so interesting. I had a couple of young ladies I interviewed, and they verbally said that what they bring on board, they have the same training, but what they add up on board is even that they feel like they're better for the job because they also have this aspect on crew dynamics and all these social points in a crew and the human factor also inside during their job as an engineer in the engine room. So I found that hilarious. The young Turkish um, engineer telling me, no, she thinks she's better than her colleagues.
Um,
So that's a change. That is a big change. They're not these little mice that have to become like guys.
yeah, yeah,
I also before I saw always women with short hair that looked like guys, very male in their stereotype, their phenotype.
yeah.
But now I see more and more seafarers on board that really look like women. They have long hair. They're even sometimes with a bit of makeup, And I meet them in the CCR and we talk, and I find out that they have they're living their gender. Being female. They're not like before, and that is a big change. This is just a little. It is a big change in the sense of compared to before, but there's still need of change, of course.
No, but that's amazing. That's really good news, and I like the confidence. I like the confidence the women have. I think that's really yes, good and something we could aspire to. Um, I wanted to ask, what gives you hope when working with such a transient and often overlooked population like seafarers? What gives you hope about this work?
Sort of a difficult question. For me, of course, my faith, as I said, gives me hope, and hope is also that the young generation is better informed about their rights, about what should they accept and what should they not let go. Um, Thanks to the media we have and the way of information, they're able to gather information and seek for help. They are also informed about these topics that have always existed, mobbing on board, and they are trained and aware of it in a different way of these mental aspects. And I think that is a very hopeful thing to reduce suicide on board and to reduce um, people that are overwhelmed or are maybe in the wrong place because not everybody is meant to be a seafarer. Some guys try it and they find out it's not their place. They cannot do it. So the way they deal with it, that it's not a shame anymore to not be able to do it, to not be the hard guy, that gives me hope, and that they are also able to speak up, to talk, and to open up. That they don't have to be strong, that they are allowed to cry also in front of a port chaplain when they feel like it.
Yeah.
Because some learned this stupid sentence that a guy doesn't cry. No. um, One chief officer from Ukraine, he said a phrase to me 2 years ago, and I will never forget that. He said, "Well, in former times, ship used to be made of wood, and seafarers used to be made of steel. Now it's the opposite way." And I think it's a kind of a criticism what he wanted to say, but what I perceive is very positive. Yeah, the guys are not made of steel because they're not robots. They are human beings,
Yeah.
and they don't have to be strong all the time. They're also allowed to show weaknesses because they're just humans like you and me.
Yeah. Wow. That's really powerful stuff. Um, so finally, I want to ask you if you could speak directly to like young women listening, maybe someone considering a role in port welfare or social work, what would you want her to know?
Young women, I would always, in general, women in that role, it's always good to go on board not alone as a woman. It's always good to be two.
Mm,
Mm, because of course there's some guys that are too long on board, and then you always have somebody aside also who listens, who has another ear, who also can support you. And then what is also important to know is uh, this can be because they are working 24/7, doesn't mean that women in welfare need to work the same hours. Yeah, limit yourself the hours.
yeah.
Be self-caring because you cannot care for others if you don't know self-care. Um, and the third thing is like you need to have empathy, but you need to know your boundaries very, very, very well. You need to know yourself very well to do this job. That's what I think is the most important.
Well, Sylvie, thank you very, very much. Is there anything else before we close that you would want to that you want to add? Maybe something that I didn't ask?
Um, I would like if people listen to the podcast, I would like, and I have never dealt with this idea, just remind them to have seafarers, to keep seafarers in their back of their minds, because everything we have, everything we consume, has come by sea. Um, like 90% of all the goods we're consuming and we are owing. Um, have a glance for them too, and try to be also supportive for these invisible heroes that work for us every day and which are never a topic, never seen, and never heard.
Wow, Sylvie, that's so eye-opening. Thank you very, very much for doing this interview. You have provided such good information. I think things that people don't say or find out very often. So I think this is a very special episode. And thank you very, very much for giving me your time and for all the compassionate work you do. I could only aspire to be like you. That is, it's so empowering. It's so nice to see what you're doing. So thank you very much, and thanks again for doing this interview.
Thank you so much, Carla, for considering people at sea, no matter if they're female or male, and giving me the opportunity to, yeah, to be there with you today.
Thank you for joining us on Waves of Change Women at Sea. If this conversation inspired you, you can support us by liking, sharing, subscribing, and if you'd like, by making a donation. You'll find a link in our bio. Until next time, let's keep making waves.